Look at this chocolate bar. $2. Maybe $3. Look at it closely. The cocoa inside that bar was grown in West Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana. Together, these two countries grow more than half of all the cocoa on the planet. More than half. Now here's the number that should stop you cold. The global chocolate industry is worth over $100 billion every single year. Over $100 billion. And the two countries that grow more than half of the cocoa it is made from, Ivory Coast and Ghana, according to trade data reviewed by development institutions, capture only a few % of that value. Stop there for a moment. Let me say it more simply. For every $100 the world spends on chocolate, the African farmers who grew the actual cocoa see only a handful of dollars. The rest, more than 90 of every 100, stays outside Africa. Wait, read that again. The continent that grows the crop earns the smallest slice of the crop. That is not a market accident. That is a structure. And tonight, I'm going to show you who built it. Because this is not an accident. This is not bad luck. This is not because Africans cannot make chocolate. Ghana has cocoa. Ghana has people. Ghana has factories. So why does Ghana not simply make the chocolate itself and keep the 100 billion? Tonight, I'm going to show you the answer. And the answer has a name. For over 60 years, Europe built a system. A quiet system. A system with no walls you can see. No soldiers. No fences. A system built out of one thing. Tariffs. And that system did something very specific. It made sure Africa stayed the farm and Europe stayed the factory. For 60 years, it worked perfectly. But here's what nobody in Brussels, in Paris, in London wants to say out loud. That system is now collapsing. And it is not collapsing slowly. Because while Europe was not watching, China walked in and quietly started taking what Europe thought it would own forever. You are watching Historic Capital. This is the dossier on the tariff trap. Like and subscribe. Let's talk about it. Let me show you how the trap was built. It begins with one word: tariff. A tariff is simple. It is a tax on a product when it crosses a border. Now watch carefully, because this next part is the whole secret. For decades, the European trade system worked like this. If an African country sent Europe a raw material, raw cocoa, raw coffee, raw cotton, raw timber, crude oil, the tax was low, sometimes zero. Europe said, yes, send us your raw materials. We welcome them. Bring them in. But if that same African country tried to send Europe a finished product, processed chocolate, roasted packaged coffee, woven cloth, finished furniture, the tax climbed. Sometimes it climbed high enough to kill the sale. This has a name. Economists call it tariff escalation. The tax escalates, it rises, the more finished the African product becomes. Now think about what that does. Think like a businessman. If you want to build a chocolate factory, and Europe lets in raw cocoa for free, but taxes finished chocolate, where do you build the factory? Not in Ghana. You build it in Europe. You bring in the cheap African cocoa. You add the value in Europe. You keep the profit in Europe. The factory follows the tariff. The jobs follow the factory. The money follows the jobs. And Africa is left holding the cheapest part of its own wealth, the raw material. This is the invisible wall. You cannot photograph it. It is not a fence. It is a number written in a trade agreement in Brussels. But that number decided where factories were built for 60 years. And that number always told Africa the same thing. Stay raw. Stay the farm. Let Europe be the factory. And here's the deeper truth hiding underneath all of it. The richest nations on earth are rarely the nations with the raw materials. They are the nations that process them. Control the farm, and you earn a little. Control the factory, and you control the future value of everything the farm produces. Europe understood that. That is why Europe fought to keep the factory. You think this is theory? Let me open the files. File 1. Cocoa. Ivory Coast and Ghana grow most of the world's cocoa, but for 60 years, the chocolate was made in Switzerland, in Belgium, in Germany, the names you know, the expensive names. The growing happened in Africa, the profit happened in Europe. Africa grew it, Europe sold it. File 2. Coffee. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee itself. Coffee was discovered in Ethiopia, but the famous coffee brands, the ones that sell a single cup for $5, the roasting, the branding, the profit, European and Western. Ethiopia grows the bean, Europe drinks the profit. File 3. Cotton. West African nations grow some of the finest cotton in the world, but the cotton left Africa raw. The weaving, the fashion, the clothing brands happened in Europe and Asia. Africa grew the cotton, then Africa bought back the finished shirt at 10 times the price. File 4. Oil. This one is the cruelest. Nigeria pumps crude oil, sells it cheap, then buys back refined petrol at a far higher price. Africa sells the barrel cheap. The West sells it back expensive. Same oil. The profit added in Europe. File 5. Look at every single file. Cocoa, coffee, cotton, oil. The pattern never changes. Africa sends out the raw material. Europe sends back the finished product. And the profit, the real profit, stays in Europe. Every time. So ask the forensic question. The question at the center of this entire investigation. Who got rich while Africa stayed the farm? You already know the answer. Now stop there for a moment, because I want to make this real. This is not history. This is not a chart. This is happening to real people, right now. One of our subscribers sent me his story. He is from Kaduna, northern Nigeria. His family grows ginger. Not oil, not gold. Ginger. Dry ginger. And he had a simple dream. He wanted to package it properly, seal it, brand it, put a real Nigerian label on it, and export it directly to Europe, himself. Not as raw sacks thrown into a container, not through 3 middlemen. He wanted to sell the finished product. He wanted to climb. So he studied the process, the packaging requirements, the certification costs, the inspection fees, the tariff structure at the European border. And the more he studied, the more the profit disappeared. Line by line, cost by cost, until there was nothing left. And slowly, he understood something. The system welcomed his raw ginger. The door was wide open for raw sacks. But the moment he tried to move up, the moment he tried to sell something finished, the barriers appeared. Quiet, cold, structural. Nobody shouted at him. Nobody banned him. The wall did not have a face. It was just numbers. Numbers that made his dream impossible. So he gave up. He went back to selling raw ginger, to the same middlemen, at the same low price. Think carefully about what that means. A Nigerian export brand that could have existed does not exist. Not because the man was lazy, not because the ginger was poor, but because the system punished him for trying to add value. The closer he moved to the finished product, the higher the wall became. Hold that phrase, because we are going to see it again and again. Now let me show you why nobody stopped it. Here is what they will tell you. They will say, Africa was free to industrialize. Africa just failed. Africa was lazy. Africa was corrupt. That is a story they want you to believe. Because if the failure is Africa's fault, then the system is innocent. But watch this. A factory is not a quick thing. A factory is a promise to the future. When you build a factory, you are betting 20, 30 years ahead. You need to believe the electricity will be stable. You need to believe the roads will work. And above all, you need to believe the rules will not change. Now imagine you're an investor. You want to build a chocolate factory in Ghana. You look at the European tariff. You see that finished chocolate is taxed at the European border. You see that if you build in Ghana, your chocolate gets punished at that border. So you do not build in Ghana. You build in Europe instead. The tariff did not just tax a product. The tariff killed the factory before it was ever built. Now here is the part that will make you sit up. Europe did not become rich through free trade. That is a myth. When Britain was rising, when France was rising, when Germany was rising, they protected their own young factories. They used tariffs to shield their industries until those industries were strong. They climbed the ladder. Protect first, grow strong, then open the markets. But when Africa's turn came, Europe gave Africa the opposite advice. Open your markets now. Export your raw materials now. Trust the system. Europe climbed the ladder and then told Africa the ladder was dangerous. Europe shut the factory door and then said Africa simply never walked through it. This is not Africa failing. This is Africa being structured to fail. And here is the part that should stay with you. Another subscriber wrote to me, a different family, a different product, the same wall. His family processes groundnut oil, peanut oil, the same oil Nigerians have pressed for generations, in their own homes, with their own hands. And he had the same dream as the man from Kaduna. He wanted to bottle it properly, clean bottles, real labels, a proper brand. He wanted to export finished groundnut oil to the world. So he ran the numbers, the bottling cost, the certification, the export paperwork, the regulations, the tariffs waiting at the other end. And he reached the same painful place. Selling raw peanuts was easier than selling finished oil. The raw sack moved freely. The finished bottle hit the wall. Now think about that. Two men, two different states, two different products. Ginger in the north, groundnut oil somewhere else. They never met. They never spoke. But they discovered the exact same law. The closer Africans move toward the final product, the harder the global system becomes. That is not a coincidence. A coincidence happens once. When it happens every time, to everyone, in every product, it is not a coincidence. It is a design. The value left Africa. The profit moved overseas. The factory followed the tariff. Africa supplied. Others multiplied. And for 60 years it held. Until it didn't. Now, for 60 years, this system was Europe's. Africa was Europe's farm, Europe's supplier, Europe's resource garden. Brussels assumed it would always be that way. They were comfortable, too comfortable, because while Europe was sitting comfortable, something was happening in Beijing. China looked at Africa and saw what Europe saw: resources, minerals, a young population, a whole continent of future customers. But China did something Europe never expected. China announced it would remove the tariffs, zero tariffs, for a large range of products from many African countries. Not just raw materials, finished goods. Read that again. The wall that Europe built, the invisible wall, the wall that kept Africa as the farm for 60 years, China just offered to lower it. And the moment that happened, the game changed. Because now an African country has a choice. It can keep selling raw cocoa to a Europe that taxes its chocolate, or it can sell to a China that does not. For the first time in 60 years, Africa has somewhere else to go, and Europe is starting to realize it may be losing the continent it thought it owned. But before you celebrate, stop, because you have to ask the dangerous question. Why is China really doing this? Let me be very clear. China is not your friend. China is not a hero. China did not lower these tariffs out of love for Africa. No country gives away access to its markets out of kindness. China is playing a game, a long game, a patient game, and it is a smart one. Let me show you the board. Move 1, the minerals. The future runs on minerals. Lithium for batteries, cobalt for electronics, copper for everything. Africa holds enormous reserves of exactly these minerals. By pulling Africa close now, China locks in the resources that will power the next 100 years. Move 2, the market. Africa has the youngest population on Earth. In a few decades, 1 in every 4 humans will be African. China is not just buying minerals. China is buying the biggest customer base of the future. Move 3, the influence. Every factory China helps build, every port, every railway, every trade deal pulls a piece of Africa away from Europe and toward Beijing. This is not about chocolate. This is about power. Move 4, beating the West. China and America are locked in a struggle for control of this century. Africa is one of the great prizes in that struggle. Every time China wins an African partner, the West loses one. So understand exactly what you are watching. China is not rescuing Africa. China is recruiting Africa. There is a difference. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Even a move made purely for China's benefit can still crack open a door that Europe nailed shut for 60 years. China wants to use Africa, but in wanting to use Africa, China just handed Africa something it has not had in living memory: a choice, two buyers, two suitors, competing. And when two powerful buyers compete, the seller finally has power. But do not get drunk on this moment, because if Africa is not careful, it will simply swap one master for another. Hear me clearly. Warning 1. If Africa runs from Europe straight into the arms of China and signs the same kind of weak deals, then nothing has changed. The farm just got a new owner. Warning 2. Lower tariffs open a door, but a door is just a door. Africa still has to walk through it. That means factories. That means stable electricity. That means roads and ports that actually work. China lowering a tariff does not build a single factory in Lagos or Accra or Nairobi. Africans must build those. Warning 3. Watch the contracts. A tariff being removed means nothing if African leaders sit across the table from Beijing and sign away the minerals, the land, the future for a bridge and a stadium. The lesson of this channel never changes. The danger is never only the foreign power. The danger is also the local signature on the bad deal. Warning 4. Every empire acts for itself. Europe did, China does. The next one will too. Africa's future cannot be a gift from a foreign power. It can only be built by Africa. Let me leave you with one true story. Go back to the 1990s. China was poor, truly poor. China was the farm. China was the cheap labor. China made the small plastic things for everyone else. But China made a decision. It refused to stay the farm. It protected its factories. It built its power supply. It trained its people. It was patient. It climbed the ladder, step by step, decade by decade. And in 30 years, China went from the poorest farm in the world to the factory of the entire planet. 30 years. Now look at Africa today, the youngest population on Earth, the minerals the future needs, and now, for the first time, a door being opened into a giant market. China had less than this when it began. China had less. The question is not whether Africa has what it takes. Africa has it. The question is whether Africa will recognize this moment, the way China recognized its moment, and build. Because moments like this do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, as a line in a trade document, as a tariff being removed, and 30 years later, the history books call it the turning point. So return to that chocolate bar, the one sitting quietly inside a supermarket shelf, because hidden inside it is the blueprint of an entire economic system. A system where Africa ships the raw and buys back the finished, where the continent that grows the resource rarely controls the profit. For decades, that system looked permanent, untouchable, but something changed. The people who designed the old trade order are starting to panic, because Africa is no longer dealing with one buyer, one bank, one empire. And when competition enters a system, the secrets start leaking. The private meetings, the port agreements, the mineral licenses, the tax waivers, the names hidden inside holding companies, the politicians who appear on television talking about patriotism while signing contracts that lock entire generations into dependency. And the deeper we followed this investigation, the clearer something became. Africa is not poor. Africa is negotiated. The real battle was never about aid. It was about leverage, control, processing, ownership. And somewhere tonight, in a quiet office inside London, Brussels, Beijing, Abuja, new agreements are already being signed. New extraction routes are already being planned. New debts are already being negotiated. The next generation has not even read the contracts yet. That is what makes this dangerous. Not because the system is hidden, but because most people still think there is no system at all. You are watching historic capital. The truth is in the transactions. Follow the money. If this investigation changed the way you see something as ordinary as a chocolate bar, then understand this. The chocolate was never the real story. It was the evidence. Because this dossier connects directly to a larger pattern, the subsidy trap, why entire populations can sit on oil and still become poorer, the visa factory, why the smartest young Africans keep leaving while foreign economies quietly depend on their labor, And the next investigation may be the most sensitive yet. The contracts, the ports, the lithium deals, the processing rights, the names of the people approving them, the people promising development while negotiating ownership. We started following the shipments. Now we are following the signatures. So before the next dossier arrives, look around your country carefully. Ask yourself one question. Who really owns what your nation exports? And who signed it away? Subscribe, because the deeper we go, the more expensive the truth becomes.